August 1881, along the muddy banks of the Missouri River just outside Jefferson City, Missouri, the sheriff muttered, "She's your problem now," and shoved the shackled girl toward the flatboat captain. The girl, no woman, barely stumbled, caught herself, and straightened up. Her wrists were cuffed in iron, her mouth split and healing, her eyes sharp and furious. Her name was Beatrice Hale, and everyone in town had a different story about what she had done. Burned a barn. Stolen a horse. Shot a man. None of it ever proven, but enough whispers kept the law sniffing until they found something to stick her with. Now, she was being sent downriver to some work farm out west. Out of sight, out of mind. Trouble. The sheriff muttered again to no one in particular. She was born trouble. The captain barely gave her a glance before nodding. We'll drop her in Kansas. After that, not my concern. Beatrice did not say a word. She stared straight ahead at the river, jaw tight, like she had memorized every ripple and current. There was nowhere to run, no one coming for her. She had made peace with that days ago. Except someone was watching. Across the dock stood a man with a dust-worn hat, arms crossed over a faded blue shirt, boots caked in trail mud. His name was Boone Barrett, a horseman from the Flint Hills, and he had come to town only for supplies and a new bit for his mare. He had not expected to see a woman being hauled off like a sack of wheat. He watched the way she held her chin high, even with her face bruised and hair tangled. Watched the way the sheriff sneered at her, and how no one stepped in. Boone had seen justice twist before. He knew what it looked like when a person got tossed aside because no one wanted to look too close. So he stepped forward. "I'll take her off your hands." The words dropped into the hush like a rock into still water. The sheriff blinked. "What?" "I said I'll take her. You said she's being sent to a work farm. I got work. Let her work for me. You said she ain't been charged, just sent off for being a nuisance. She's no use to you." Boone scratched the back of his neck. "Well, let me be the one to find that out." Beatrice turned her head slowly. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in days, something flickered behind them that was not anger. It was not hope either, but it was close. The sheriff laughed. "You want trouble, Cowboy, you got it." He tossed the key to Boone, who caught it one-handed. By sundown, Beatrice Hale was riding behind Boone on his mare, wrist free, silent as dusk settled around them. They rode west out of Jefferson City, past shuttered homesteads and fields gone wild with summer. Boone did not talk much. Neither did she. But every so often, he glanced back to make sure she was still there, and she never once looked like she might bolt. On the third day, they crossed into the edge of Kansas. Boone's ranch sat tucked in a bend of the Smoky Hill River. It was not much, just a two-room cabin, a barn with 3 horses, a paddock, and a boy. His boy. 6-year-old Paxton came running out barefoot, his blond hair sticking up in every direction. "Papa!" Boone scooped him up, one arm tight around the boy's middle. "Hey, buddy. Brought someone with me." Beatrice slid off the mare, boots hitting the dirt with a thud. She stared at the boy, then at Boone, then back at the boy. "You did not mention a child." Boone set Paxton down. "You didn't ask." Paxton held up a hand like he was measuring something. "She's tall." Beatrice blinked. "I suppose I am." "You look like someone who could shoot a snake." "I could." He grinned. "Can you make flapjacks?" "No." Boone chuckled. And that's the most important thing to him. Beatrice looked at the small, dusty cabin, the horses, the boy with a gap-toothed smile. Then back at Boone. "You trust me here?" "No," Boone said. "But I believe you got better in you than what they said." That night Beatrice sat on the front porch with a blanket around her shoulders while Boone rocked Paxton to sleep inside. The stars were sharp above the prairie, and the air smelled of horses and dry grass and coming rain. She did not know what to do with the quiet. Boone came out after a while, sat on the step beside her. "You never asked why I stepped in." Beatrice looked at him. "You saw a stray and thought you could fix it." "No." Boone said. I saw someone who looked the sheriff in the eye and did not flinch. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I did burn the barn. Boone nodded. Why? Beatrice's voice was flat. Because the man who owned it tried to put his hands on a girl who worked for him. No one believed her. I made sure he never got the chance again. Boone said nothing for a while. Then, You hungry? She exhaled, just a little. Yes. Days passed. Beatrice worked. She hauled water, brushed horses, learned the rhythm of Paxton's chatter and Boone's quiet ways. She never asked questions, never pried. But she watched. Boone had scars he never talked about. A long one along his ribs. A limp that came out when he was tired. He moved with the kind of calm that came from being knocked down and standing back up over and over. And he watched her too. He saw how she flinched when a door slammed. How she sat with her back to the wall. How she never let anyone touch her, not even by accident. One night, weeks later, she was patching a tear in Paxton's shirt by lantern light. You could leave, Boone said quietly from the doorway. I know. You are not mine. You are not owned. She nodded. I know. But you are safe here. If you want to be. Beatrice looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. You got a lot of faith in people. No, Boone said. Just in you. She stared at him, something shifting in her face. Then she looked down and kept sewing. That night, she slept with the door open. Just a crack. But it was the first night she did not bolt it shut. By September, the sun baked the tall grass flat and gold, and the wind carried dust instead of rain. Beatrice had taken to rising before the light, tying her hair back with a strip of muslin, and feeding the chickens before Paxton stirred. Boone didn't comment on it, and she didn't offer reasons. It was just how the mornings went now, quiet, necessary, unspoken. One evening Boone returned from town with a cracked knuckle and a split across his cheekbone. Beatrice was folding linens when he walked through the door, blood dried in a line down his jaw. You get in a fight? She asked, not looking up. He set the sack of flour on the table. I said the wrong name in front of the wrong man. She wiped her hands on her apron. Yours or his? Boone eased down onto the bench. Mine. She poured water into a basin, dipped a cloth, and wrung it out. As she pressed it gently to his cheek, he winced but didn't pull away. Was it worth it? Didn't care for how he talked about the blacksmith's daughter. Beatrice's hand paused. What did he say? Boone shifted his jaw. That she ought to keep quiet and marry whoever said yes first. Her fingers tightened on the cloth. And you told him he was a fool. I told him he ought to be grateful she didn't slit his throat. She pressed the cloth harder. You ever think about what it costs you saying things like that? Boone met her eyes. I think about what it costs not to. After a moment, she sat back and dropped the cloth into the basin. You're not from here. No, where then? Arkansas. Washita foothills. Left after my wife died. She blinked. You were married. He nodded once. How long's she been gone? 6 years. He tapped a thumb against the grain of the table. Fever took her before Paxton could talk. Beatrice reached for the basin and rinsed the cloth clean. You love her still? Yes. She didn't look up. But grief isn't a coffin, Boone said. It's a room. You live in it a while. Then you step out. She wrung the cloth slowly. What if you're not sure you want to leave the room? Then maybe someone knocks on the door. That night, Boone stayed outside after dark, mending the paddock fence by lantern light. Beatrice watched him from the window as she dried the dishes. The cut on his cheek had scabbed over, and he moved slower than usual. She didn't offer help. She just watched. The next morning, she took Paxton along the river bend to gather stones for the hearth. The boy chattered as he climbed over driftwood and shouted when he saw a heron lift from the reeds. Beatrice listened, quiet but not distant. Papa says you used to ride? Paxton tossed a pebble into the water. I did. Fast? Faster than most. He grinned. You gonna teach me? She looked at him. You got to learn to fall first. I already did. Last month, off Molly. Scraped my elbow. Beatrice crouched beside him, picking up a smooth rock. Scraping's not falling. When you hit hard enough to knock the wind out your chest, that's when you learn if you want to get back on. Paxton tilted his head. Did you? She brushed the dirt from the stone. I did. That night, Boone found her in the barn, brushing Molly's coat in long, steady strokes. You didn't have to take him out today, he said. I know. I was going to fix that back gate tomorrow. It's already done. He leaned against the stall door, arms folded loosely. You've done more work in 2 months than most hands do in a year. You want me to stop? No. She set the brush down. Then what is it? Boone's eyes didn't leave hers. I'm trying to understand what you need. Beatrice stepped out of the stall, dust on her sleeves. You already gave it. What did I give? A place where no one expects me to explain myself. He nodded slowly. That's not always enough. It is for me. Then I'll let it be. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Boone. He looked back. I don't scare easy. But I don't trust easy either. I'm not asking you to. She stepped closer, her boots quiet on the packed earth. I'm just saying I see what you're doing. And I'm not looking away. Boone's shoulders eased, just slightly. All right. She walked past him, back toward the house, the lantern catching the curve of her jaw. He didn't follow. Just watched her go, the way one watches the sky shift before dawn, knowing something's changing even if it's not quite visible yet. By the first frost, Beatrice had stitched a winter coat from old canvas and rabbit hide, her fingers nimble from years of mending things no one else bothered to fix. Boone had offered one of his own, but she'd said, "It won't fit," and left it at that. He didn't push. The wind came colder now, the kind that slid under doorframes and made the horses restless in their stalls. Boone hauled extra wood inside and set up a cot in the main room for Paxton, closer to the stove. Beatrice added another quilt to the bed she used in the corner, pulled tight across the edges like she was daring the cold to try her. One night, with the wind rattling the shutters and Paxton curled asleep in a nest of wool, Beatrice sat at the table reading a rail schedule Boone had brought back from town. Her brow furrowed as she traced the lines westward with one finger. You thinking of leaving? Boone asked, not unkindly. She didn't glance up. I like to know the ways out of a place. Boone poured hot water into 2 cups, handed one to her. You ever take a train before? Once. Didn't like it. Too fast? No. Too many people pretending not to see each other. Boone eased into the chair across from her. You think they'd see you now? Beatrice folded the paper and set it aside. They'd see what they always see. A woman who doesn't sit small. I've never known you to sit any other way. That a complaint? Boone shook his head. It's the reason I listen when you talk. She studied him over the rim of her tin cup. You always that direct? Only when I mean it. Beatrice reached for a thread hanging from her sleeve, tugged it free. You don't ask questions like other men. I figure you'll tell me what matters. And if I don't? Then I wait. The lantern between them flickered. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote gave a lonely call, and the sound stretched through the silence like a memory either of them said aloud. In the weeks that followed, Beatrice taught Paxton how to track deer prints in the snow, and how to tell rabbit from hare by the shape of their scat. He followed her like a shadow, asking questions she answered with single words and gestures, letting him piece the rest together himself. One afternoon, Boone returned from the river bank with a soap boot and a stringer of trout. Beatrice met him at the porch, her arms dusted with flour. The boy said you nearly fell in? Boone glanced down at his dripping trouser leg. He's generous. I did fall in. She stepped aside to let him pass. You'll make a fine cautionary tale. Inside, Boone peeled off his coat and dropped it near the stove. You can laugh, but that water's colder than a banker's heart. Paxton looked up from his drawing. Did you see the beaver lodge? Boone nodded. Near the bend. One of them slapped the water, just as I slipped. Beatrice poured hot cider into a cup and handed it to him. That one's earned. Boone took it, then watched her for a moment. You ever think about staying longer than winter? She didn't answer at once, just wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter. I think about things in pieces. What kind of pieces? Like, can I plant something here come spring? Can I sleep the night without flinching? Can I speak without weighing every word? Boone looked down into his cup. You can do all that here. I know. I'm just waiting to believe you mean it. He didn't try to convince her. Just nodded once and sipped his cider. That night, as snow began to fall in slow, heavy flakes, Paxton stirred in his sleep and called out once. Beatrice was already at his side before Boone stood up. She knelt beside the cot, tucking the quilt tighter around the boy, brushing a hand over his hair. He settled, breath evening. Boone stood in the doorway, watching her silhouette in the firelight. He doesn't wake for just anyone. Beatrice didn't turn. He reminds me of my brother. I didn't know you had one. He died when we were both still too young to know how to stop it. Boone stepped forward, slow. You don't have to tell me. She rose. I know. But I want to. They sat on the floor beside the stove while the snow piled outside. Beatrice spoke softly, pausing here and there, as if the words had to be coaxed out. She told him about the brothers who rode too far one winter, about the mother who didn't wait long before marrying again, about the way silence had been her only shelter for too long. Boone didn't interrupt. He listened the way some men pray, not asking, just holding the weight of the words. When she finished, she didn't cry. She just leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. You ever think, she said, about what comes after the hard part? Boone looked at her, the firelight catching the edge of her jaw. I think it's this. She opened her eyes. This? He nodded. The quiet. The good work. The knowing someone's near. Beatrice didn't reply. But she didn't move away when he reached over and took her hand. Her fingers, calloused and rough-edged, curled around his like they'd already known the shape of his grip. Neither of them said another word. Outside, the wind buried the last of the tracks. Inside, the stove burned steady and warm. The days shortened, but the work never did. Snow came in layers, thin at first, then thick enough to weigh down the barn roof. Boone hammered braces into the rafters while Beatrice shoveled paths from the house to the coop and back again. Paxton learned to stack kindling without snapping it, and Beatrice taught him how to bank a fire so it'd still be warm in the morning. One morning near the end of December, Boone came in with a letter clutched in his glove. He shook the snow from his shoulders and handed it to Beatrice. It's from Fort Dodge. Came addressed to me, but it's yours. Beatrice held it without opening it. The paper was creased and the name written in a hand she recognized but hadn't seen in years. She tucked it into her apron and didn't read it until after Paxton had gone to sleep. Boone was tending the fire when she unfolded the letter and read it standing. Her eyes moved across the page slowly, then stopped. She folded it once, then again, and set it on the table. Who was it from? Boone asked. My father's sister. I didn't know she was still alive. She wants something? Beatrice sat down, her face unreadable. She says she's in Topeka. Has a room with a stove and steady food. Says I could come. Boone didn't speak. She glanced over at him. I didn't ask her for help. I didn't figure you had. She said she heard I'd been arrested. You weren't. No. But she heard it anyway. The fire cracked. Boone reached over and adjusted the log with the poker. What are you thinking? Beatrice rubbed her thumb along the edge of the table. I'm thinking she didn't ask how I was. Just said I could come if I needed. Do you? She looked up at him then, and her voice was quiet but sure. No. Boone nodded. Then we'll burn it in the morning. But she didn't burn it. She folded it flat and placed it in the bottom of a box beneath the cot. Not as a keepsake, but as a record of something that no longer held her. 2 days later, Boone led her into the barn after breakfast. The horses stood quiet in their stalls, steam rising from their noses. He stopped beside the far stall and pushed the gate open. Inside stood a young buckskin mare, smaller than the others, with a dark stripe down her back and a cautious eye. "She's yours," Boone said. Beatrice frowned. "What for? You've been on your feet since you got here. Thought you should have something that's yours outright." She stepped into the stall and let the mare sniff her palm. The horse didn't flinch. "She's green. She'll take to you." Beatrice ran her hand down the mare's neck. "I don't need a gift." "It's not a gift," Boone said. "It's a place to put your trust." Beatrice looked back at him. "You think I've got any of that left? I think you've got more than you think." She saddled the mare before noon and rode her out past the north fence line, gone just long enough to settle the horse's legs under her. When she came back, snow clung to her boots and her cheeks were flushed. "Good legs," she told Boone, dismounting. "She just needs someone who won't quit on her." Boone took the reins. "That's two of you, then." That night, Paxton sat at the table drawing with a stub of graphite while Beatrice sliced dried apples into a pot. Boone leaned against the doorframe, watching the two of them move around each other like they'd always belonged in the same space. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" he asked Beatrice. She didn't look up. "You said you'd take me off their hands? I didn't know what I was doing." "I did." Boone stepped closer. "I've been thinking about what you said. About people pretending not to see each other." She stirred the pot. "And? I see you." Beatrice set the spoon down. "Why now?" "Because it's not just winter anymore. There's going to be a spring. And I want to know if you'll be here when it comes." She turned to face him then, all the stillness of the years before gathered in her eyes. "I don't want to be taken. Not owned. Not rescued. I don't want to do any of those things," Boone said. "I want to stand beside you, and build something that doesn't need fixing." Beatrice glanced at Paxton, who had fallen asleep over his drawing, then back at Boone. "You can't say things like that unless you mean them." "I do." She stepped forward. "Then say less and stay near." Boone reached for her hand. She let him. No one needed to say the rest. Not that night. They laid Paxton in his cot, banked the fire, and sat on the edge of the bed with their knees touching. The wind blew hard against the windows, but inside there was only warmth and a quiet that didn't need filling. Come spring, they would plant. They would raise foals and mend fences and teach Paxton how to ride bareback if he could keep his balance. The buckskin mare would learn to trust Beatrice's hands, and Beatrice would learn Boone's silences as well as his words. But for now, they just sat, the space between them gone, their hands clasped like rope tied firm around something they both meant to keep. The thaw came slow, seeping into the earth while the sky still wore its winter gray. Mud coated the fields by afternoon, and the river swelled with melt, brown and fast. On a morning when the robins sang low and persistent, Beatrice stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled and a pail in hand, watching Paxton chase a stray chicken with a piece of bread tied to a string. Boone came up behind her, boots soft on the wood. "You think he'll catch it? He's got the patience," she said. "Not the subtlety." Boone rested a hand lightly at the small of her back. "You didn't sleep." She didn't answer right away. "I had a dream I was back in that cell in Jefferson City. Except this time I wasn't the one locked up." She looked at him. "You were." Boone's brow furrowed, not with fear but with something more thoughtful. "What do you think it meant?" "I think—" She stepped out onto the porch and sat on the top step. "I think I stop running when I know you're free too." He sat beside her, knees bent, hands clasped loosely. "You think I'm not? I think you carry things you don't speak on." Boone looked out toward the hills. "I carried them quiet because I didn't know if they'd matter to anyone else." "They matter to me," she said. He nodded. My father drank himself into the dirt before I turned 17. My mother followed 5 winters later. I stayed in the hills too long after that, thinking if I worked hard enough, I could keep the emptiness from settling in. Did you? No. But I learned to work anyway. They sat in silence while the wind stirred the grass just beginning to green again. I've thought about marrying again, Boone said after a long pause. Beatrice didn't respond, though her jaw tightened slightly. I didn't say it to push you, he added. But I wouldn't want to go through another year pretending I didn't want more than shared chores and quiet nights. She turned to him, eyes steady. You want to marry me? I do. You think we're ready? I don't think anything's ever ready. But I know I don't want to spend another season wondering if I'll lose you to silence. Beatrice reached over and took his hand. Then don't. They were married under the cottonwood just beyond the paddock, with Paxton holding a piece of fabric Beatrice had stitched from one of her old skirts, tied around his waist like a sash. The preacher from the next settlement came out on horseback, and a neighbor woman brought a tin of preserves as a gift. No one asked about the past. They only stood quietly as Boone and Beatrice said the words that bound them, eyes meeting without hesitation. Afterward, they ate dried apple pie and drank coffee boiled over the fire. Boone carved their names into the cottonwood's bark, low enough for Paxton to trace with his fingers. That night, once the neighbors had gone and the moon hung heavy above the prairie, Beatrice sat at the edge of their shared bed, combing her hair in deliberate strokes. Boone came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. You still don't flinch. I don't have a reason to anymore. He kissed the curve of her neck, slow and sure. You've changed everything about this place. It changed me too, she whispered. They lay together with the windows open, letting the cool air move through the room. No shadows followed them. No old names clung to their skin. Boone held her hand through the night, and when she woke before dawn, she didn't rise. She stayed beside him, watching the sky soften, heart quiet. By summer, the garden had taken root. Beatrice coaxed squash and onions from the soil, and Paxton hunted grasshoppers to keep them safe. The buckskin mare grew into her gait, sure-footed and calm, and Beatrice rode out alone some mornings, returning with sun on her cheeks and a basket of wild mint. Boone found more time to teach Paxton how to repair buckles and mend harnesses. The boy had a knack for the small things, hands careful and precise. One afternoon, he looked up from his work and said, Mama Beatrice, do you think I'll be tall like Papa? She looked at him, startled but soft-eyed. I think you'll be taller. Boone, from the porch, didn't say anything right away. Then he stood and walked to them, crouching beside the boy. You've got her spine and my temper. You'll do all right. That night Beatrice sat on the porch steps while Boone lit his pipe. The sky stretched wide and lit with stars, and the wind carried the scent of pine and warm dirt. You happy? Boone asked. Beatrice didn't answer at once. She leaned back against him, her head finding the space beneath his chin. I didn't think I'd get to be, she said. But yes. Boone wrapped an arm around her waist. It doesn't scare you anymore? No, she said. It's not something I have to keep. It's something I get to build. In the fall, they added a second bedroom for Paxton and lined it with shelves for his rocks and drawings. Beatrice made curtains from old feed sacks, and Boone carved a hook for the boy's coat. They worked side by side, slow and steady, never rushing. The seasons came and went, but the feeling remained of ground beneath their feet, of hands that knew how to hold without pressing, of love that didn't need naming every day to be known. Paxton grew, and the buckskin foaled, and the stove stayed warm through every winter that followed. And every morning, Boone woke first, just to watch her breathe in the quiet before the light touched the floor.